To start it off, I'm sort of feel like I have to give you a little bit of the history of development in the United States in sort of very broad strokes to give you an idea of where we've come from and where we are, just to give you a sense of what the legal framework is. Some of this may be old hat to some of you. Some of it may be brand new. So we're going to have time for questions at the end. If you want to write them down, we'll cover them. I'm going to have some visual aids behind me here. Very few words, fortunately, on my PowerPoint. But keep questions in mind, and we'll try to cover them all at the end. So Ian asked me to cover this general topic of how can a community be involved in its developments of its farmland, and lots of areas in the United States had farmland before they had houses, and so this is an old topic. It's been around for a long time, and people have dealt with it for a long time. And you have if everybody can see, you have the farm, and you have some people driving by that farm, and they say, "Ooh, wow, that would be a beautiful place to live. I would love to live on a farm." And somebody comes along and says, "Well, I can make a lot of money making houses on that farm, and I'm going to make it really nice. I'm going to have this beautiful subdivision. We're going to have all this green space and make it wonderful for everybody to live in. We're going to keep the trees, and we're going to have this nice field." And that's the plan. So when you're sitting in your 20th floor condominium somewhere, and you'd say, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice to walk outside into the field?" And you get a little brochure in the mail with this picture on it and the picture before it saying, "Wouldn't you like to live next to this farm in this beautiful community that we're building in western North Carolina? And it has all these trees, and it's going to be a sustainable development, and this is what it's going to look like." And that may or may not be what it's going to look like when it's actually built. So that's why in the United States we developed all these rules about what you can do when you're developing land. And you have all sorts of things called the Interstate Land Sales Act. You have the all sorts of rules passed by the North Carolina legislature that apply to North Carolina. And there are all these rules out there that developers have to follow. They have to be honest with you about what they're going to do with the land. What you buy should be what you get, that sorts of thing. And these rules have developed as consumer protection rules mostly, because it used to be you'd get something like this in the mail, and you'd get a picture like that, and you'd end up with this. Or this, which is not, as you can imagine, doesn't really fit with the plan. So these rules that I've giving you in broad strokes deal with what you can tell people about what you're going to build, what sort of documents you have to give to your local authority that would show what you're going to build and how it's going to be built and who's going to pay for it, and if you can't pay for it, what will happen then. This is what I would call a mature legal system. It's been around for decades. Everybody's probably heard of Levittown. It was sort of the first subdivision as such, the bedroom community, and it might be, people might go to Levittown and think, "Wow, this is really quaint and cute," and of course it's probably aged well, better than something like this that you're seeing here. But the good thing about this, in some respects, this system, is that it's very certain. We know what the rules of the game are. We know that you have to have plans. We know that you have to have roads. And in North Carolina, you have to have a bond that the developer has to give in case the developer runs out of money and somebody has to complete a road which is otherwise washing away. It's a very stable system, but you get very cookie cutter development, and there's not a lot of incentive there necessarily to build something that has sustainable ideas in it. It can, but it doesn't have to. So in other words, you can get a community that has and they exist. I think you've heard about them earlier today, about communities that have sustainable elements in them. They have a concentrated housing, perhaps, that leaves more green space open. Perhaps it's farmland even. This system of development allows for sustainable elements, more green space, keeping farmland, as long as it's part of the plan. And from the beginning, it certainly allows for that system to be part of it, including conservation easements. Those types of things can be part of this same system. But the system itself has its problems, and I'm not sure if anybody in here lives in a place that has a homeowners association. Okay, we got a few. And I don't know if you've ever been to a homeowners association meeting, but they can be very interesting. You can get a whole range of topics on them. Excuse me, I'm going the wrong direction. So the question is, at a homeowners association meeting, who's in charge? And it might be you have a homeowners association meeting and the developer is still in charge. You might just be the advisory panel, so to speak, the people who have a lot to say but not a lot of control. And so to me, that is a central question on this issue of how do you get people involved, whether they live in the community or they want to live in the community or they live next to the community, next to the farmland. Who's in charge? And the traditional model is the developer's in charge from the beginning, and that's how you end up with, potentially you end up with a cookie cutter subdivision. The good thing about that is it gets done. Usually you don't have a committee of people all have different opinions about what should be done and when. So my image of the developer, this is a crowd pleaser, is somebody like this who gets to sit in a chair and say, you go over there, you do that, we're putting the road right here, and no one really gets to say anything else about it. It's going to happen, and you live next door, you live in the community, and sorry, that's the plan, and that's how we're doing it. But it does get done, generally speaking. So, maybe the model is more like this. You have a committee of people working together, and they share common goals, and they want to get along. They have reason to get along, and they're neighbors, and their kids play together, and they have nice fences between each other, that sort of thing. But you still have potentially conflict. You have a homeowners association meeting. It might look like this. It might look like this. Or that could be the zoning commission meeting too, either one. Or city council, take your pick. But so, a lot of this comes from this question of who's in charge. If you have a group, there's a lot of opportunity. If you have a group of people that share authority to do something, to protect some resource, to make decisions about how land is going to be developed, it's a benefit and it's a burden. It's a lot of opportunity to involve people and try to do what's right, but there's also a lot of room for conflict, and sometimes the conflict can completely take over and make it so that nothing gets done. So that's the basic model, and a lot of the problems with it and the benefits to it. All these. This is kind of the dream, to carry the dream forward, perhaps, of some of you might have. You have a green space, you have a community garden, you're sitting on your porch having a cup of tea, and you've got these trees all around you, and your neighbors are close by, and you're all getting along. How do you achieve that dream as somebody who's going to live in this type of community? And don't forget, it might be you or a family that moves there. So you might be the neighbor, you might prefer the farmland, but growth happens, so to speak, to use a euphemism. So you ask, well, what are the alternatives to this traditional model of subdivision development? There are some. Some are better than others. You could have a land trust. You could have a conservation easement. That's part of your development. I grew up in a community that was essentially a cooperative, that the ultimate residents in that community bought the land from the beginning, and so they got to decide where the lines would be, where the roads would be, who got to build, what type of building would be built, and where the common land would be. They were the committee, so to speak, and it did get done, and so it's certainly possible to make that happen. And that could be a land trust. In looking at this from the perspective of a lawyer, there are many different technical tools to get to that goal. One is a land trust. It's a nonprofit. Various other ways that you can get there, and really what drives the type of tool you're going to use is the economic question. Who's contributing money? How is it going to get managed? And who's in charge of it? So are you going to have, the nice thing about a conservation easement is you have a third party involved. You have a very clear restrictions on what the land can be used for, and that mostly can't be upset. That's, once it gets established, it's done. No changes. End of discussion. That makes it very easy. Again, you have to deal with, how do you resolve disagreements when you could all have this dream, and you all contribute money to start a community, to save some farmland, whatever it is, but you have to have a framework to make decisions, and if somebody disagrees, you have a minority. It's like a small business. If you go into business with partners, you might all contribute something, but you might have a disagreement. How are you going to resolve that? How are you going to extract yourself from it? So, Ian asked me in this context, what can neighbors do to preserve farmland? And not a lot, unfortunately. The best thing you could do is think about it in advance. You have to say, okay, I am in favor of farmland being preserved. I would like that to happen in my community. You got to make sure that you get out in front of that and decide that as early as possible. And then set yourself up to seize opportunities when they come to you. So you set up your land trust early. You contribute to the Sierra Club or some organization that looks for farmland to buy. You get involved in the county zoning process, which sets some of the basic rules about who can develop what where. You do that early, because whenever you have this system of land development, as I've just outlined it, and the rules are pretty set. They get adjusted, the zoning gets adjusted sometimes, but the basic rules are pretty set, and they've been set for a long time. So you as a consumer, as a citizen, as a buyer of land, of anything, you like to know what those rules are. And so you want to know in advance, before you go buy something, what the rules are and what you can expect. That's basic. It's a basic element of our economic and legal system in this country, is reasonable expectations about what you can do with whatever you buy, be it a car or land, whatever. So after somebody's bought something and makes a plan based on those expectations, if you want to stop them, you have to figure out a way to show how they are not following the rules. And if they are following rules, it's probably going to be too late. So that may be not something that's great to hear. But the good thing is there's lots of farmland that still can be saved, that's not being sold right now, and it's a good time to get organized and try to save it. So that's the end of my prepared remarks. I'm happy to take questions.
A question that comes to mind for me, and thank you, that was very clarifying to me. A question that comes up is there are things like holding companies. There are structures that could be some kind of business partnership where I've got $100,000 to throw in, and I've got $75, and I've got $26,000 to throw in, and how can we make it worth the owner's while to keep the farm off the market, quote unquote, while you think something through? Are there ways to structure those kinds of models that can buy time while everybody participates in an outcome that you can get a well-rounded buy-in on?
Certainly, but you have to be willing to pay for it. I would say that's the bottom line. So you can, one way would be if you're trying to put some plan together to incentivize a developer that is going to build something like we saw earlier, and you want to incentivize them to build something that might fit better and is more sustainable. You say, okay, well, I have some money, and I'm willing to pay you for some portion of that for the right to buy this for some additional amount. You could have a right to buy it. You could have a status quo agreement of some kind, but you have to make it worth the developer's worthwhile. So, and that is a function of a private business deal between whatever the entity is, and it could be anything. It could be a consortium, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a land trust, it could be all sorts of different legal creatures that, many of which would work. But I think the bottom line would be the business deal between you and the developer or the owner about how much time are we talking about, and at the expiration of the time, what happens.
So after there's already an option or a contract in place from a developer, are there statuses that can be conferred onto that land that would disrupt the process after it's already begun? Something like a status of historically protected or something like that?
Well, generally speaking, there are no historic protections for land in it of itself. You have historic protections for buildings generally, which protect the buildings or can protect them. The land itself, you get back to this issue of, generally speaking, whatever the rules are before the offer to sell are going to be the rules after the property sells. So there's some very interesting types of zoning that happen on the West Coast that deal with protecting farmland and forests and that sort of thing, that deal with transferring economic incentives between different areas. So in other words, you take a maybe a less desirable farm area, and you say, okay, this is going to be the really intense housing development over here, and you're going to give the owner of that development more rights than they would otherwise have. But then you're going to go over and you're going to take away an equal level of rights from someone else who has land that's perhaps more worth preserving, for lack of a better term. We don't use that model in the eastern United States. Generally doesn't use that model. But once again, that's getting out in front of it and saying, okay, it's in our collective interest in this entire community to preserve farmland, and so we're going to incentivize that by making the valuable farmland even more valuable as farmland, and the not so valuable areas more valuable as developable land, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
No more questions? I guess I stumped the band otherwise. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I'll be sticking around if you have any other questions. Thank you.